Hi everyone, Amna Nawaz here live in New York. We have for you right now an incredible behind-the-scenes look at a brand new ABC News documentary that is out today. You can get it on all ABC News digital platforms. It's called An Inconvenient Border, where China meets North Korea. And we have here with us in studio the one and only Bob Woodruff. Excuse me, I'm so excited. The only one who could really report this kind of story in this way. Bob, thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's great to be here.
It's an incredible documentary. It is a look at North Korea unlike any we've seen before. I want to start, before we get into it, though, with a little bit of breaking news, because we've just heard today that President Trump has signed a new executive order authorizing new sanctions, essentially targeting individuals and companies that finance or facilitate trade with North Korea. You've reported on this country for so long. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it was due. It was good. We expected there was going to be more, because there's no been any reaction to the previous sanctions against Kim Jong Un.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more to come. I think this is the beginning of diplomacy, or extended diplomacy, and they've thrown in the air this possibility of some kind of military reaction to all of this. So it's interesting to see that something happening, but the fact is, all these years, sanctions have not worked at all. So we'll see what these ones do.
Well, your timing could not be better when it comes to this documentary, because this is exactly what you guys explore in such great detail. Why decide to report on the story that way, from the border?
Because a couple of things. One is the border that gets most of the attention, certainly by reporters and really just in the news, is the DMZ, between North Korea and South Korea. But the one that most people don't talk about is this 880 miles of border between China and North Korea. And you couldn't get a different border than this one. The DMZ is divided about 2 miles of a buffer between the South and North Korea, and it's filled with all sorts of both military on both sides. And then you go to the Chinese border, and there are not many soldiers along that long border. In fact, it's just separated by two rivers, Yalu and Tumen. And these two, and then a big mountain in the middle called the Mount Pektu. And so this is the division between North Korea and China. And it's sometimes the river is about 40 yards wide and shallow. So people could walk out of that country of North Korea and swim across to China, but not, there are a lot, but not all as many as you think there would be. And there's plenty of reasons why that's not the case.
I want to talk about that in a second, but one of the things you end up focusing on is the economic relationship between China and North Korea, which we don't hear a lot about. I want to play one clip in particular because it made my heart stop. It's you sort of showing how this relationship works in this steady stream of trucks that goes back and forth, and you do a little exploring on your own. Let's take a look at this clip, and we'll come back on the back end.
Looks like the back is open. Let's see what they got in there. These things may have already been unloaded. So this was clearly something they loaded up, took it over to North Korea earlier today, and then they just came back. So they're probably going to reload for tomorrow. So all of these trucks have North Korean license plates. This was loaded up. Now it's empty.
So Bob, what do we know about what's on those trucks, what that trade means for those two countries?
Well, there are a lot. If you look at that's Dandong, that's the island, that's the city that's really the furthest to the south along the border, and that's about 70% of the trade that goes back and forth between China and North Korea, either by bus by a truck or by train. So that is the biggest connection to North Korea for China. And that is one that China's come across with several sanctions involving a lot of that trade. But we still, to this day, continue to see plenty of this coming across, because about 90% of all that trading between China and the Chinese trade with North Korea, about 90% of it happens on that bridge.
It's incredible.
That you just saw.
We should also point out, which you do in the documentary, this economic alliance is really just economic. There are still tens of thousands of Chinese troops stationed along that border in some places, right?
Yeah, the troops are there. You can kind of see you can see the North Koreans watching across the river at China, and you can see the China with their own towers looking with cameras over to the other side to North Korea. But there is military there, and you see training on the river between North Korea and South Korea. So whether that's got more than there was before, I don't even know, but the tension is certainly growing, which you'd see in this piece.
And you are standing, as you mentioned, in some cases, mere yards away from that North Korean border, standing on Chinese shores, where you can see people just living their everyday lives, doing their everyday things, but it's really a world away. What is that like, to stand there and see them right there?
Yeah, and it's very different. So you can just watch over and you see what is a much poorer, less populated country of North Korea. So you see these developed cities of China with tall buildings and evidence of wealth. And then you look across, and at night it's dark, there's not much lighting at all. And then you see like old plows that you used to see in the 1930s in the United States with a horse pulling this big plow. That doesn't exist really in China for the most part. So they're very different countries. It's really North Korea's only real ally. Russia's an ally too, but they're not doing anything like this in terms of trade. And Russia, when it was still the Soviet Union, pulled out in the mid-1990s away from North Korea, which then launched starvation in North Korea. So if China pulls out, it would return to the same thing, and it would be a disaster. China does not want this regime to fall.
Sometimes when you're standing there watching these incredible scenes in the documentary, when you're seeing life unfold, it strikes me so often we see North Korea through the lens of Pyongyang, and being able to see other North Koreans just living their lives. You describe it using a phrase, it's mundane but hypnotic. What did you mean by that?
Well, it is. It's like a different era. It is like you're looking back in the 1930s and some of the world that's there. I mean, obviously this kind of poverty is in the countryside of China too, but it doesn't look quite like the poor parts of our country. We have McDonald's everywhere. We have advanced machinery. We've got pretty damn good companies in the countryside of our country. It's not even compare it to the U.S. at all. In some places like China, but it's a different world in North Korea. It's the most isolated country in the world. I think people know the least about North Korean people. But as you go further north, and you see this in the documentary too, if you go further north along that border, you get where there's more and more North Korean people that have defected all of these years into the northern part of China, and all of the signs are not only in Chinese, but they're also in Korean as well. So this is completely a Korean culture in northern China as you go close to that border to the north.
Well, speaking of defectors, this is a question I think a lot of people will have when they watch, because you are so close. There is nothing but a bridge or a shallow body of water. Why don't more people defect?
Well, you would be shocked. Why don't they get out of that country? It's countryside, so it's not like there's a big city right against that border. So it's mostly countryside and farming, agriculture. But you also know a couple things. There have been defections over, some because people are, even by military, even North Korean military have come across. Part of it is they're underpaid and underfed. So they come over to eat and get a different kind of life. And some of them go back. There are plenty of defectors that have come across that northern part of North Korea into the Korean area because they can then find a way out. There's a lot of Christian groups that actually try to take some of these defectors and find them a way to get out, largely through China to the south, like into Laos, for example, then ending up in South Korea. But the main thing to remember is if somebody defects and they want to get across, even if they're not caught, they have family members back in North Korea, and they would almost for sure end up in a camp for re-education or even executed.
There is another moment in this documentary that was striking to me, really for the nuance it provides, which is when you were talking to a gentleman there in China about Kim Jong Un, who here in America is sort of the classic bad guy, right? He's crazy, he's unhinged. That's how we talk about him here. But you asked that man, and he had a very nuanced answer. I just want to play that right now.
That's a prison right there?
这个桥你要是真正上来福建的桥，朝鲜建的，中上投的钱。
Kim Jong Un built this bridge?
备战用的。
Why did Kim Jong Un want to build this bridge?
就是备战用的。
For a war, get ready for the war.
So, Bob, what was that moment like? Give me the context of that conversation.
Well, China's view of what's happening in North Korea and this increasing tension is sometimes they blame it on the U.S. and South Korea stepping up the joint operations by the military, all of the peninsula area. So they think that they're angering North Korea, and that's why Kim Jong Un is cutting down relationships with China, has not opened some of these bridges. There's been, very unpredictable relationship between Kim Jong Un and China. It's different than his father Kim Jong Il, or certainly his grandfather Kim Il Sung. So China sees that a lot of this tension is one. Yes, they don't know a lot about Kim Jong Un, but they also blame the United States on a lot of this because we've maintained our influence within South Korea, and China doesn't want the United States to be so close to them, and they certainly don't want to get that buffer of North Korea, of that regime, to fall, because China believes for sure that if that falls apart, South Korea and the United States would push up, maybe even against that border with China, and they would like that a lot less than having a disastrous country of North Korea as it exists now. Well,
I have a lot of questions for you. I should also say, for those of you out there on Facebook joining us, if you have questions, you can send them in right here. We are in conversation with none other than Bob Woodruff, who is the man behind a new ABC News documentary, An Inconvenient Border, where China meets North Korea. I have to say again, your timing is just incredible, though. I want to ask you, because we talk so often about U.S. and North Korea relations with this phrase, rising tensions, especially with this new administration. You've been reporting there for years and years and years. There's fabulous video in the documentary of a younger Bob Woodruff in the field in Pyongyang. How have you been viewing that relationship between the U.S. and North Korea?
Well, I think of it as who's the great leader at the time. If you looked at all those years where Kim Jong-il was in power, China had a huge power of influence over North Korea. They knew that Kim Jong-il didn't have the kind of strength that his father Kim Il-sung had, the one who established North Korea, shortly after World War II, which led into the Korean War with the United States. They knew that he was powerful. They knew that Kim Jong-il was one that continued to influence, that China could influence. So their relationship there was pretty strong because, again, they were able to have a country that was standing between China and the U.S. Since Kim Jong Un came in, this has changed. There's much different relationship, and I said before, is because he is unpredictable. He has not come to China. He's not really interacted with Xi Jinping, even though his predecessors, his father and his grandfather, have been there many times to China, because it's their only real ally. So it's changing completely. 12 years ago, within North Korea, the food was worse. The freedom of the people seemed to be worse. The advancement of the people was much not as modern as it is now, and that the technology within North Korea was nothing compared to what it is now. So when you go in there, you can see the women and the men with more Western clothes. The women have high heels on now you never saw before. You saw people have cell phones that they can talk to within Pyongyang, but it doesn't extend outside that city much. They can't talk on cell phones with people outside the country. It's maintained as isolated. And there's a lot of change in the wealth within Pyongyang, but that's the elitist center. And that's largely the only place they allow us to go to. We cannot go out to the countrysides. We can't see the camps. We can't see the areas of poverty.
Right.
So we can't see a lot of North Korea when we're there, other than the ones that we've concentrated on. I mean, I was at one of the nuclear facilities in 2008. It was very rare, but that's when they're really negotiating to try to end their nuclear power. But that's fall apart. They're never, not to say never, but it's very difficult to get them to show us where they're doing their nuclear tests or their launches of missiles.
Well, there is no one else who could tell this story like you do, and I encourage folks out there to watch this as soon as they can. Before we let you go, a couple of Facebook questions coming in from people out there who are tuning in. Beth has written to ask, have you ever felt threatened during any of your visits there?
I don't think I ever felt threatened. I know there's a couple moments where I wouldn't say disobeyed with the minders. The minders there are guides that we cannot leave their side.
You're assigned one as soon as you come in, right?
Yeah, we can't go and walk freely without them. There's been moments where I went to places where they hinted or at least told us we should not go, but I would never stand up and say, don't tell me where we can't go, and then just go there. If I did that, that would have been different. I mean, sadly, we know the case of Otto Warmbier, who's the American who was taken captive for doing something that they believed was offensive to their great leader Kim Jong Un. if we did something like that, that would be a completely different world. But I think we've been there so many times. We know how to dig for every piece of information we can and try to shoot anything that had not been shot before and learn everything we can about that country. But we generally know what the rules are, and so I've never felt threatened that way.
And how
but
far
we have
you can
been,
push
we have
it.
been kind of taken aside and had to sit and be questioned, and they took.
You've been detained.
They took my
You've-
phones.
yeah.
I've been detained, and they
Yeah.
took our phones and they looked through everything, and they erased a lot of things in them. A lot of times, photographs really that we took. I was not able to take photographs with my cell phone of soldiers in particular checkpoints, and I did, but I didn't know specifically that was one of the places. And sometimes I've taken some things that I knew they didn't want. But we were questioned many times, and they've taken things from us.
You mentioned Otto Warmbier. We have another question from Michelle, who asks, why didn't the U.S. government help the American who was detained and later died from his injuries?
Why did not the American?
Why didn't the U.S. government? I guess she's asking why wasn't more done? Why wasn't he able to be released earlier?
You know what's really shocking is they didn't know about it for a year. The U.S. was never told. There are two different groups within North Korea. There is the military and the security units within North Korea, and then there's the foreign affairs, foreign ministry, which is all the U.S. relationship is with them, including us. When we put our request to go to North Korea, we go through the foreign ministry and the ones based in the United States, in New York. There's no embassies, et cetera, in the United States from North Korea. The connections all through the UN operations. That's the only ones that we connect with. And and our sources said this is really true. Even the foreign ministry didn't know about what Otto Warmbier was going through.
They had no idea.
They had no idea. And so that's why the U.S. didn't even know about it until he was already, for months and months, already in a coma. So when they finally found out, then they reached the point where the foreign minister could get together and try to, or maybe we can work out to get him back to the United States. So it was shocking to everybody, including with our own U.S. government, that this information was withheld.
This is the last question I'll ask of you before we let you go, I promise. Lisa is asking a question on everyone's minds these days, I think, particularly given some of the comments over the last week or so. She's asking if you think that North Korea is in danger of starting a war.
I wish we all knew this. One simple thing just to remember, though, is for the building of nuclear powers in North Korea is not to, listen, this is all speculation, right? These are just our thoughts and experts that we've all spoken to, is that North Korea is not wanting to invade and gain land. It does not want to get a new country.
Right.
I mean, they did that after World War II, where the North wanted to take over the South, which was then forced back by the United States to the 38th parallel. Right, doesn't make a lot of sense. But they also know there's a major threat to the regime, to the Kim Jong Un family. And the building of this gets two things for them. One, it tries to resist anything from happening where the U.S. would invade and get rid of Kim Jong Un, or even underground through CIA operations. The other one, if they can create North Korea as a nuclear state, that changes all negotiations with them. And that's the other thing that they're almost certainly trying to create themselves as a nuclear state. So that's fully done, and they're named as one, then they changed their position. And I think the fear of them starting an invasion, most people believe that it wouldn't happen unless there's some triggering, there's some major threat of ending the regime. And that certainly can't be done through diplomacy, but it could be done through any massive operations military operations outside of the country. But we just don't know. I mean, this is different than any other country. This is not you and I have done a lot of experience in the Middle East and those wars, but those were wars
Very
between
different
countries that were not our great allies.
Yes.
I mean, and there were not really major allies around those countries like Afghanistan and Iraq. But this is all around North Korea is our close allies, Japan and South Korea. So anything that happens within North Korea is going to affect them with significantly. That's why we haven't done anything yet.
Well, there is no country like it in the world, and there's probably no journalist who could tell this story the way you have, Bob Woodruff. Congratulations.
Well,
it's an
thank you so
incredible
much.
documentary. It's called An Inconvenient Border, where China meets North Korea. It is available right now on all ABC News platforms, or you can just download the ABC News app right now and watch it right on your phone or mobile device. Bob Woodruff, thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you so much.
We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks to all of you for watching as well. Head over to abcnews.com anytime for more on this story, or download the ABC News app for the latest right to your phone. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back here soon.